the third issue, which is very important to both our hearts, is water. And we chose this issue because it is existential, or as Glenn would say, consequential. And we chose it also because of the recent clash over Helmand River, also because it is a reason for exacerbating the conflict in Sudan. Refugees from Sudan are fleeing to Chad, and 90 to 95% of Lake Chad is gone. So there are many, many, many data points that tell us that water all across the world, and in particular the overpopulated so-called third world, is in real scarcity, because population has shot up, consumption, per capita consumption has shot up, and rainfall has decreased, and groundwater has decreased, and surface water in terms of ponds, lakes, wells, everything else. Wells, of course, come from groundwater, but surface water has declined dramatically. So all of this points to rather grim news, or rather grim future, and I'll let Glenn carry on more and develop the theme.
As we look at the mega trends, as the U.S. intelligence community has termed it, for the coming decade and decades, water is one of the mega trend issues that will most affect life on Earth and the future of states and the existence of individuals. We won't give the broad briefing, but with demographic changes, which means population increase, urbanization, aging of the populations, and mass movements of population, refugees, migrants, welcomed and illegal, the strains on societies worldwide will threaten the stability of society. The immigration crisis in the United States is not a phobia and imagined by the right. It is real. How one needs to respond to it is a political issue, but they aren't inventing large numbers of legal and illegal migrants or aliens. All of these trends affect water. The demand for water worldwide is projected to increase by the year 2030, 40%. The supply of water, of potable water on Earth, is constant. There is a fixed amount. It does not increase. But the demand will increase by 40% in the next 7 years. The population of the Earth will go from 7.1 billion 5 or 8 years ago, I guess, to 8.3 billion probably.
It's 7.88 by current estimates.
Okay.
And an important statistic for everyone to know is that, as per the United Nations, 4 billion people on the planet, which is more than 50% of the population, experience acute water scarcity, or actually more than 4 billion. So the figure could be even higher, could be towards the 60% side. Acute water scarcity at least once a month a year.
Today. That's today.
Today.
Right.
If you live in the US, everything is nice because you turn on the faucet and you get hot water and cold water.
If only this relatively, yes, but in real terms, the answer for the U.S. is that we are blind, or maybe less blind than we were, but not responding to what are already crisis levels, which I'll get to in a moment. So the Earth is adding 67 to 70 million people per year. By 2030, there'll be another 600 million people or some such thing. The demand for water will increase by 40%. The supply will not. Urbanization continues to increase, which increases demands. The consumption of meat, as people become more prosperous, goes up. That is a dramatically stressful pressure on the food supply, but also on energy supply, both of which are dependent to a large extent on this water supply, which will not increase. What is happening with global warming? As we all, by this point, know, it is true that there is less rainfall, as Atul said, but it also is more nuanced than that, because in many places there is more rainfall, but of more intense character, and which means that the runoff is quicker. The rain water does not soak into, is not absorbed by the soil as effectively, and
That's
there are longer
also because
periods
of
of dryness.
deforestation. That's also because of deforestation. Because if you
Right.
denude, especially catchment areas, mountain slopes, etc., of trees, then the soil loses its water
Right.
retention capacity.
Even when you have heavier rainfalls, you have higher temperatures. The Earth, the average temperature on the Earth has increased 3 degrees since 1970, I believe. And with every 1 degree, I've written this down so that I won't get this wrong. Uh, yes, with every 1 degree increase in temperature, there's a 9% decree in the flow of rivers due to increasing rates of evaporation. So the soil becomes drier, the rivers become drier, emptier as temperature rises, even if rainfall increases. So, what will happen? Not only are these trends global, but they're also localized, and the severity of temperature increase and the consequences of drought, higher evaporation, lower water flows will be most intense where humans can least absorb the shocks, which is the Middle East in descending order roughly, the Middle East and North Africa. So what's been called the crescent of fire, or I forget the exact term, but basically from the Atlantic in Morocco to India, going across the Mediterranean and the Gulf.
That's
The
South
Middle East.
Asia. So the most water-stressed area, as per the World Bank, is the Middle East and North Africa region, and then after that, it is the South Asia region. So, speaking of which, when I was young, I remember there were times in certain summers when a water tanker would come and we'd carry buckets fill the bucket from the water tanker, carry it to the drum, and fill up the drum. And this would happen once a day. And then, of course, we'd use the drum for our needs, household needs, whether to take a bath with a bucket and whether to cook after boiling the water. And that scarcity has come back. There are water tankers now going around many cities because there simply in the summer months isn't enough water. So something we thought that would go away and the problem would go away once we had piped water everywhere. And once we sank tube wells, has reappeared because the tube wells have run dry, or the piped water is coming from reservoirs that have run dry. Yeah. So Roberto Campani asked, "What can we do?" Well, that's a very profound question. We'll get to it, but part of it will be reducing demand. There's always, in any situation, the supply side and the demand side. And those who believe in supply side believe you can have infinite supply. Desalination will do it. I don't believe in such extreme ideas. I think eventually it'll be a mix of both. There'll be some supply side solutions in places like Saudi Arabia or other places, but you will have to improve our groundwater harvesting and improve supply. But yes, of course, we'll have to lower demand, and that would include lots of things, changing agriculture, changing usage, and changing wastage. And one could go on, but I'll let Glenn crack on further.
Yeah, it's not, tragically, terrifyingly, it's not only the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, but also Southern Europe, the northern littoral of the Mediterranean Sea, South Africa, and the U.S. Southwest. So not only is it true that countries will experience in the coming years, not decades, years, severe water shortages, meaning to the point where people don't have enough water to survive. But even before that, not enough water to produce the energy, because water is often used in energy production, or the food for people to survive. But we are seeing now, and Atul alluded to a couple of examples, now such stress from water crises that states are collapsing. I mentioned the case of Syria.
Could you very quickly educate our listeners about and our viewers about Syria? Because most people don't realize the role that the drought played in exacerbating the civil war.
Syria, as we know, has experienced now a decade or 15 years of hideous social collapse and civil war. And why? The conventional reason attributed is the reverberations from the American invasion of Iraq. And that is certainly a contributing factor to the disaggregation of Syria. But deeper than that, and even preceding that, was that the Middle East is has been for many years in a historic drought. And in Syria specifically, the agriculture sector, the farmers, could no longer grow crops. They could no longer make a living. And since they couldn't make a living, they had to flee their farms to the cities. The state did not have the means to respond effectively to the social and humanitarian crisis that these refugees, these environmental refugees, created. And on top of that, the population could no longer feed it. The society could no longer feed itself. And that led to social stress and civil war. At the same time that there was the American invasion and the rise of Islamic extremism, all of which, those three factors caused Syria to implode and explode simultaneously. But that's not an isolated case. We've seen this in Darfur. Why was there religious stress? The Muslims killing animists and trying to convert them, yes, but also because there was such a drought that people were actually dying and had to flee and become refugees. And no one wants a bunch of poor refugees in their home when they don't have enough water themselves and the people are of the wrong religion. So that was another factor. This is the case now in South Sudan and Sudan. It is the case in many places. And I'll give one example, which we can generalize to at much greater stress levels even than the United States. The land of plenty. Atul says we can't see this as well, and that is certainly true, but it remains true nonetheless that 2 kilometers from my house, there is a sign. When you enter my hometown, it says water crisis in effect. And there are theoretically water restrictions. One is not supposed to use water in a number of ways. I live in a part of the country, of the world, where there is over 1 meter of rainfall every year. There's over 1 meter of snow every year. And despite that, and this is a relatively low density populated area. It's not a city. It's a rural suburb. Despite that, there has to be active management of water now in a place where the rain falls all the time. But I want to talk about the case of the Southwest United States, land of plenty. Some of you will have read about the quote, historic, unquote, agreement on how to address the issue of the Colorado River and the water supply, on which 40 to 100 million Americans depend. The water flows from the Colorado River. But as I've mentioned in previous talks, because it's such a dramatic fact to me, one of the great rivers of the continent, the Colorado River, no longer reaches the ocean. All of the water is sucked out of it before it gets there and is used. Over 57% of all the water used coming out of the Colorado River is for agriculture. And that primarily means in the southwest of the United States for cattle, the production of beef, which is, I think, 700 times more demanding for water use than growing oh gosh, I forget the point of comparison. But there's nothing more demanding on
growing wheat. I think the
growing wheat.
comparison
Thank you.
is wheat.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's wheat.
Yeah.
There's nothing more demanding.
So maybe in that case, the Indians are right. You shouldn't eat beef.
Well, for sustainability, for us to survive, it is, and I don't want to sound touchy-feely here, but it is a fact that the earth cannot sustain growing enough beef or cattle to provide as much meat per capita as the United States consumes. It cannot be done. So that's just a fact. So the Colorado River the authorities reached an agreement that will last for 3 years, obliging a 14% reduction in use across the board for these 40 to 100 million people, which will impact agriculture more than anything, which means production of cattle. Why has this happened? Because temperatures rise. I mentioned the fact that as the temperature goes up 1 degree, the flow of the river drops 9%. The temperature has risen 3 degrees since 1970. So the average flow is down 27%. At the same time, the population has increased threefold, I think. And the trends of, even in the U.S., of urbanization, population growth, temperature rise, rainflow decline, reservoir depletion, snowpack depletion, all continue.
So you're telling us that America is not that exceptional?
Not at all. And literally the ground has sunk in the Southwest in large areas, not just an area the size of a home. In large regions, the ground has dropped by 10 meters in the Southwest because the water table is depleted. And you think, oh, the water's in the ground. Well, the amount of water used by taking it out of the water table per decade, I think, has been calculated to require 40,000 years to restore itself. So the only solution is to be more efficient, reduce use, and change, frankly, a lot of the practices that are day to day for every society. One is profligate and privileged as the United States, and one is destitute and at the verge of starvation as South Sudan. And this is a real-time issue which will only become dramatically more acute in the next few years.
Yeah. And we talked about the clash between Afghanistan and Iran. And there are many who've said that if the previous wars were about land, resources, and oil, future wars could well be about water. So on that note, it's 1 p.m. We've come to the end of our time, 1 p.m. Eastern time here. We've come to the end of our time. And we bid you all a fantastic month ahead. May you have a glorious summer. We'll see you back at FO Exclusive on the last Wednesday of June. Bye for now.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.